Welcome to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast, a place where ideas, principles, and personalities come together to give you a ministry advantage that empowers the church and home.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here are your hosts, Marianne Howard, Ron Hunter, and Josh Wooten.
Well, I am excited about today's guest, Mr. Tim Elmore, and he mentions a flight attendant approach to something. And once you hear the podcast, you're going to understand it a little better. But I thought we could kick this off today by thinking about what has been the scariest or craziest flight you've ever been on, Ron?
Oh my goodness. There are some fun ones. And a lot of times the craziness happened before getting on the flight. And that's a story for another time. But I would say there are two crazy flights that I've been on. One I can tell very quickly. I was on a flight, which, first of all, being it was Delta, that should say enough. I'm a Southwest guy, and you either love or hate Southwest, but I love Southwest.
Mm-hmm.
But I was on a Delta flight one time, many, many years ago, and we were landing in Atlanta, which I think every Delta flight has to land there. And we were coming in for a landing, and then the pilot guns it. We were like 50 feet from touching the runway, or well, it had to be higher than that. We were a little ways from touching the runway. We were at treetop level, let me put it that way.
Okay.
And he guns it, and we don't land, and we take back off.
Oh my.
And he comes on the intercom, and I could tell, everybody could tell, he was mad. He said, "Passengers, forgive me." He said, we were coming in for a landing, and one of those little small pilots with his own plane was down on the end of the runway and missed his turn off and continued on the runway, and therefore we could not land. He will be talked to by both traffic control and I if I get down on that ground. And we had to circle the runway, which caused us to land like 15 or 20 minutes later because they had to fit us back into order.
Wow.
That's one of yours, and then I'll tell you another funny of mine.
It's kind of interesting. It's actually, we were flying from Atlanta to DFW. We were at a conference, and the flight was pretty normal and everything was going smoothly. We were in our own worlds. I was listening to music. Chad was probably reading, and we're flying. Everything's good. And then literally out of nowhere, it felt like the Tower of Terror drop. The skies were clear.
Yeah.
It was crazy, you guys. It was like we were at one level and we literally dropped an entire level.
Yes.
I felt my body with physics go up. I came up. I don't keep my seatbelt tight when I'm flying because I trust it, I guess. I don't know. And I felt my body literally come up to the maximum floating of where the seatbelt's holding me in because of some sort of physics reason, right?
Yes. Isn't that a great feeling?
I mean, well, Ron, I don't think so. I felt like I started to see heaven, in the moment.
It is the roller coaster feeling that you're not supposed to feel on a plane, though.
Yes, and there was panic.
Yes.
And I grabbed Chad's arm, and even he's so steady, and nothing really scares him. And he was even like, "Whoa, that was weird." I'll never forget it.
That is hilarious. That is hilarious. Wow. Well, I have one more, and in short, we were flying. This was an American airline flight. I had to go visit about 4 people in about 2 days, and very key meetings I needed to have. And so I was flying from Springfield, Missouri to Little Rock, to Oklahoma City and back to Nashville. And it was between Springfield, Missouri and Little Rock. We were flying, and we were on one of those little small planes that only holds like, I don't know, 35, 40 people. There's two seats on one side, one seat on the other, and a soda pop machine in the back instead of a flight attendant. You know how those things go.
Yes.
Actually, we did have a flight attendant. It was big enough to have one of those, but it felt like that small. And before we got on this flight, they told us, they said, if you need to go to the restroom or washroom, you need to go now because the laboratory is not in working order on the flight.
Oh my.
And so I think all of us went, or many of us went. We got on the flight. It was supposed to be, hey, a short little flight, Springfield, Missouri to Little Rock, Arkansas. It's about a 30-minute flight. Not a big deal. Well, we get close to the destination. They say, hey, we got some storm clouds in the air. We're not going to be able to land in Little Rock. They're diverting us to Memphis. And we'll be landing there. And so we fly towards Memphis, but we had to fly around that storm cloud. We get there and they say, I'm sorry, we've got a circle. They're not letting us land. The ground crew's not allowed to be out on the tarmac, blah, blah, blah. We wind up being on this flight for like an hour and a half.
Oh,
and what's really interesting is the laboratory didn't just not work. They duct taped the door closed. There was literal duct tape around all the edges. And I wish, and cell phones, I don't think even had cameras on them, or I would have taken a picture, and this would have been one of my storytelling. Well, finally, they said, hey, we're able to go back to Little Rock, so we're going to head back there. It's still in the air. We start back, we get there, and then they're like, no, they're diverting us back to Memphis. And so we land in Memphis, and the pilot comes on, and he says, well, we'll give you a chance to get off, go to the restroom, be refreshed, and then we'll take back off for Little Rock. And so we land, we taxi up towards the gate, and the pilot comes on and he says, sorry, passengers. He says, they're telling us that we cannot offload. We must refuel and head back to Little Rock. And there was a riot that broke out in vocal areas of protest on that plane going, no, you are going to let us off or there's going to be a problem. Because we'd been on the plane nearly 2.5 hours at that point.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Yes.
That was no bathroom. Oh my goodness.
Worst. And it's okay if, but the moment you're told you can't do something is the moment you've got to do something.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Oh
my goodness. What a crazy day.
I loved Tim Elmore's illustration of the flight attendant. So well put. And I think all of our people are going to love hearing that. And I tell you what, why don't we just jump into a commercial break? And when we come back, Dr. Tim Elmore will take it from here, and he will impart words of wisdom in a beautiful way. And Marianne and I will debrief at the very end.
Are you concerned about your church's future? Will it serve another generation? The Bible says He is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and yet we often only know how to connect to Abraham. Let D6 help you connect with each generation. Your kids and grandkids are counting on you. D6 comes from the principles of Deuteronomy 6 and helps what happens in church also happen at home. Curriculum you can trust. Discipleship that connects.
Dr. Tim Elmore is the founder and CEO of Growing Leaders, a nonprofit organization created to develop emerging leaders. Since founding Growing Leaders, Tim has spoken to more than 500,000 students, coaches, teachers, and parents. He is also the author of more than 30 books. Dr. Elmore, thank you for being here today.
My pleasure, David. Good to be with you.
Well, we're talking about a very timely issue today, and that is the pandemic's effect on Generation Z. And you've written a book, The Pandemic Population, that has really taken a lot of research and talked about this. To start off, though, I want to go to a question that I'm hearing from a lot of people. I'm hearing it from parents. I'm hearing it from teachers. My wife teaches in the public schools, and the parents' response to them is all over the spectrum as far as what's going on. We hear our kids are falling so far behind, or we hear our kids are absolutely fine. It's no big deal. What are you seeing as it relates to where our young people are right now coming out of this pandemic?
Yeah, well, we see the same expanse of responses, and part of that's dependent upon the temperament of the child and the health of the home. Some parents are just creating a great environment of love and kindness and belief, and then others are just scared to death for their children. I do see a trend, and I have seen this for years now, that just was accelerated by the pandemic, and that is this fear narrative on the parents' part that our kids are falling behind, or worse, they're not going to be ready. I shared research last night about how 64% of American adults believe the kids are not going to be ready for adulthood when it happens. And I just think that's grown worse in our minds. It's our narrative that they're not going to be ready because look what they have to deal with now, an economic downturn, the health and safety of our culture. So we believe that we can begin to guide the narrative of the child if we lead a healthy home and church and school.
Yeah, and in reading the pandemic population, one thing that really stood out is how different our handling of this pandemic has been compared to past generations, especially when it comes to things like media exposure, social media, our 24/7 news cycle. What effect is that nonstop exposure having on today's kids?
Well, you can imagine. Some of it's intuitive, but I did immediately, in March of 2020, I started studying. What did we do in past pandemics? This is the fourth pandemic we've experienced in the last 100 years. So that's amazing. So I just started digging, and I found out what adults did, caring adults did. They guided those kids with, okay, we're going to be strong, we're going to make it, we're going to be strong, we're going to make it. And of course, we still believe that now as Christ followers, but I think we got a fear narrative going on now. So one of the most fun conversations I had was with what I call the Great Depression kids. They're now 85 to 95 years old, but they grew up during the Great Depression. I said, did you even know you were in a Great Depression? They go, heavens no. Because there wasn't social media. There wasn't a 24/7 CNN news cycle. So they knew it was hard. They knew they had to share the bicycle at the house, but that was it. So part of the good news back then was the narrative came from uncles and aunts, moms and dads, not from this clickbait that we have on our phones and this news program that's wanting to get more viewers so they make it sound outrageous. I think we've got to calm the outrage a little bit and say, we're going to be fine. Let's do what we know to do and let's move forward.
Yeah, and that's interesting what you said, that this really isn't the first pandemic we've seen, even in recent years. But our handling of it is different. And you hear that all over the place, that this is unprecedented. We've never experienced this before. Well, from what you've shown in your research, we kind of have. It's just a different world.
It's true. So real quick, let me volley back. When I was in the 3rd and 4th grade, 1968 to 70, the Hong Kong flu happened. It was a pandemic, but here's how we handled it. The kids that got infected were quarantined, not everybody. So we flip-flopped that. And it was well-intentioned. I'm not saying I'm a conspiracy theorist, but it's just strange how we completely handled it differently. Our president and vice president of the country both got it and went through quarantine, and then they came out of it. But it didn't even show up on the front page of the New York Times.
Oh, wow.
Page 27 was when it showed up. And if you think about 1969, there were all kinds of festivals and ball games and celebrations, and Woodstock happened, and there were 400,000 young adults in a pandemic getting together. So all I'm saying, and I'm not saying that's right, I'm just saying it is amazing when fear becomes the narrative in your mind. You go to great lengths to protect, and I think we've done a much better job protecting our kids than preparing our kids. And that's the mantra I'm carrying now. How do we get them ready for the world that now awaits them after graduation?
Yeah, and you've used that word fear several times. And in your book, you even said that the one thing that's been more contagious than the coronavirus is fear.
Yeah.
What role have parents played when it comes to either increasing that fear or keeping it in check in their households?
Yeah, well, obviously children are always looking up to the grown-ups. Even if they don't like mom and dad, they're looking for cues on how to deal with this. So if mom and dad are fearful, if they're uncertain, if they're not sure about what to do, you can imagine that's just going to be contagious with the child, even if they don't voice it the same way. So we created a new image, a new metaphor that we're sharing with teachers and moms and dads. It's called the flight attendant factor. So we were talking beforehand about being on an airplane and going through turbulence. I've been in a plane crash. But the first thing that people do when they're on an airplane and they go through turbulence is they grab their seat handles. But the second thing they do is they look at the flight attendant. They just subconsciously know if she's still serving up Diet Coke and have a good time and joking, then things are fine. Mom and Dad, you're the flight attendant. You better stay calm. And I know you might be scared, but you can pray alone in your bedroom. We need to lead our kids with peace and poise. And we need to say with Jesus, in the world you'll have tribulation, but be of good fear. He's overcome the world.
Wow. Well, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to stay on this topic because I think this is so important, and you're giving a message of hope and encouragement right now that we need to hear. We'll be right back.
Start connecting with your family today with the D6 Family app, available for free. Based on Deuteronomy 6, D6 is the leading voice in family ministry. Scripture teaches that parents are the primary disciplers of their children. The D6 Family app delivers resources that are updated weekly and designed to equip you for generational discipleship. Resources include family fun questions, weekly splinks, parent pages, family fun nights, foundational talks, the D6 podcast, and more. Connecting with your family has never been this easy or fun. Download the D6 Family app today.
We are back with Dr. Tim Elmore, and we are talking about the pandemic's effect on Generation Z. Now, one thing that I really appreciate about you and your writing is that you see difficult times as a time of opportunity. And a lot of people are talking about the PTSD that may come from this pandemic.
Yeah.
In your book, you talk about it in terms of PTG, or post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that concept a little bit?
So these are two psychological terms. I had never heard of PTG before the pandemic. But as I began to research, I discovered that our assumptions as Americans, that if you go through trauma, you might just be vulnerable to PTSD. That is true, you're vulnerable, but you don't have to have it happen. I discovered 4 out of 5 individuals that go through trauma don't experience or don't have a lasting experience with PTSD. In fact, 4 out of 5 experience ultimately what they call PTG, post-traumatic growth. This is where you go through a tough traumatic time, but time passes. You have someone who cares for you, walk you through a conversation, listen to you with empathy, and then begin to guide the conversation to the silver linings. Remember the phrase, every dark cloud has a silver lining. So when a child feels listened to, they get to complain a little bit about missing the prom or missing this or missing that. You need to listen and say, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I know that's not what I went through. But let them go far enough and say, there is an opportunity to make the most of this or to see an advantage out of the disadvantage. So one story I love telling is the story of Isaac Newton. We've all heard of Isaac Newton, the great scientist and mathematician. He went through the Great Plague of London when he was a student at Cambridge University. Now, it wasn't a pandemic, but it was an epidemic, and thousands died in England. It was horrible. Well, Cambridge University sent their students home, just like we did. And then their own version of, social distancing, Isaac Newton found himself at home alone. But he thought to himself, wait a minute, nobody's telling me what to do now. Nobody's telling me what to study or how to study. He began to work on a theory he had developed himself and came up with a subject that we now know as calculus. We might not have had calculus. Now, that may be a blessing or a curse, but we might not have had it had he not had that time to do something redemptive. Secondly, he got his hands on a prism and started looking at beams of light, and he bored a hole in the shutter of his window, and he started looking. He came up with his theories on optics, which we still use to this day. And then finally, it was during his social distancing time that he actually saw that apple fall from the apple tree that we've all heard about and came up with the laws of motion and the law of gravity. All of this happened in a horrible plague when he had some time. So what I'm saying to teachers, coaches, pastors, parents, how could we guide our kids into thinking, what do you have time to do now that you didn't have time to do in the rat race of practices and rehearsals and classes? Who knows what God could do through us if we looked at it differently?
Wow, that's really good. I kind of wish I could build a time machine and take what you're
Yes.
saying back to March of 2020. And I'm hoping when the next pandemic hits, and if history repeats itself, it will,
Yeah.
that your book is still, Amazon still has a hold of it, because it will be used and it needs to be used. There's a quote from your book that I want to read that really stood out to me. You said, "The personal story we tell ourselves about what happens is even more important than what actually happens." Why is the story we tell ourselves even more important?
Okay, let me back up a little bit and give the context, because that was a very important statement. I'm glad you found it and found it important. All of us are going to have a memory of the pandemic, right? 18-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 36-year-olds, 50-year-olds. We're all going to have a story we're telling ourselves about how horrible the year was, or maybe what a blessing it was, or somewhere in between. A couple years ago, I started studying memory. And even though we all swear we have a really good memory of that family vacation in '88 or whatever, our memories aren't perfect. They're not accurate. In fact, they're reconfigured. So when my sisters and I were at a family reunion, we started reminiscing about growing up together. We had similar memories, but my older sister and I remembered something so different about my father. Now, we had the same dad, ate the same green beans under the same roof, but we had very different stories we were telling ourselves. My point, of course, is she's not right and I'm wrong, or it's not that. It's just that we have this reconfigured narrative as we come out of something. And hers was very angry and bitter and negative, and mine was, I thought Dad did a great job,
Yeah.
So let's apply this to the pandemic. We're going to get through 2021 on the other side of this thing, and we're either going to reconstruct a positive, here's what I'm shooting for, accurate memory, but positive narrative. Accurate memory, I remembered it was good and bad, but I'm positive that we grew from this, we got stronger from this. That's what I'm pushing for.
Yeah, that's really good. Now, the overarching theme of your book involves 8 strategies to lead Generation Z through the coronavirus. As we close, what's maybe 1 or 2 strategies that you can offer to parents as encouragement?
I know our time is short. I'll try to do this really quickly. One that I'm really convinced of we need to combine as caring adults for these kids is the one where I talk about high expectations and high belief. So real quick, in 1968, Dr. Robert Rosenthal, a research psychologist, began to inform us of the power of having high expectations when we lead children. Okay? Makes sense. A teacher that stands in front of a class that expects a lot tends to get better performance. They're not all 4.0, but they do better. But post-1968, we began to see sometimes high expectations can backfire. A kid can feel like they're too high, or, they recoil and shrivel up, and, it's that tiger mom that says, master the violin, or you don't get dinner, that sort of thing. But in the 1990s, a team of research psychologists began to couple high expectation and high belief, and it was a magic formula. So when you say to a student, I'm giving you this hard feedback because I have high expectations, and I know you can reach them. I know you, and I believe in you. Somehow, that just causes effort to go up. So teachers listening, you want effort to go up on the part of your students? High expectation, high belief. Mom and dad, high expectation, high belief. I think we've got to put those together, and I think we're going to see a strong kid after a pandemic rather than a weaker kid.
That is really good stuff. Dr. Elmore, I thank you for writing this book. It's so, even saying it's timely just doesn't even adequately describe what it is right now. We need this. And all your books, if you're listening and you're a fan of Gladwell or Goleman or Pink, this is in that category. Dr. Elmore's books are here, well-researched, fun reads, very informative. It will change your thinking. It will change your perspective. And you'll come away going, wow, light bulb moments galore. Dr. Elmore, thank you so much for being here today.
David, my pleasure. Thanks.
Mr. Tim Elmore, sir, you have challenged my heart greatly. As a mother, I'll be honest with you, the statement that you said about we tend to protect over prepare. Thank you for those words. The Lord used them in my heart today. And that's helping me seek the Lord and make sure that I'm balanced in my approach as protector and as preparer. You're so wise, sir. I was so challenged by everything that you had to say today about fear and how our kids are looking to us and how we're responding to this season. And thank you for the reminder.
That's right. I remember writing in DNA of D6 the phrase "kids take their cues from their parents." Yeah. I just didn't use the brilliant illustration of the flight attendant like Tim did on that one. I absolutely love that. You know, he mentions in there PTSD versus PTG, and that post-traumatic growth opportunity. And I did not know the stats that 4 out of 5 people who go through trauma will experience the growth versus the flip side, that PTSD side. One of the areas that we've studied in leadership, and we've talked about it in the past, is that there are major leadership studies. John Cotter's one of the leading people on it. I have a friend who did his dissertation on this, Dr. David Cook. And they show that every successful leader has a significant failure early in their career or in their life. The kids who, there's this emerging star that comes out of like the worst possible conditions, and they break through, and that is their passionate driving force. Or maybe CEOs or lead pastors or whomever. They had something that happened early on that they learned from, they moved through, and it made them stronger. And I just loved his admonition for that area for us. And parents, just be encouraged that this year, as bad as it is going to be forming. It is part of the fabric of every person who lives beyond 2021 moving forward. And we can't unweave that thread through our life.
That's right.
We got to make the most of it.
That's right. I think he said it well as we wrap up our conversation today. He said, we've got to lead our kids with peace and poise.
Oh, that is good.
And I just love that. I put that on a sticky note. Sticky notes, you guys have heard me speak about sticky notes. Sticky notes truth is a big part of my life. And so Tim Elmore, thank you so much for that challenge. We've got to lead our kids with peace and poise.
Until next time, we're going to be praying for you and praying that you find great opportunities to speak into your kids' life with that high expectation and high belief, and knowing that God is going to redeem these moments in some powerful ways. Next week, we're going to have Dr. John Trent and his colleague, Dr. Dewey, who will take us through a similar path. And I'm looking forward to this. Can't wait to see you then. We're praying for you. We'll talk next week.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.